A stray dog witnesses a cruel act on a rainy night and decides to act. What he does next defies all odds and forever changes the fate of a powerful millionaire. The rain lashed against the windows of the office on the 20th floor of one of the most luxurious buildings on Fifth Avenue. Henry observed the droplets colliding with the window, forming small rivers that zigzagged down the mirrored surface. His fingers drummed nervously on the arm of his wheelchair, while his mind wandered between memories and worries. On the mahogany desk in front of him, a small black flash drive seemed to weigh a ton. Inside it were months of meticulous investigation, documents, spreadsheets, and evidence that could change everything. Henry adjusted his posture, feeling the weight of the decision he was about to make. After 20 years of friendship and business partnership, he never imagined he would come to this point. The intercom buzzed, startling him. His secretary's soft voice announced, "Mr. Henry, Mr. Robert Mitchell is here to see you." "Send him in, Mary," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. The door opened with a soft click, and Robert entered. The room with the same imposing presence as always. The impeccable Italian suit, polished shoes, gold watch on his wrist. Everything about him exuded power and success. But Henry knew this man too well to be intimidated by appearances. "Henry, my friend," Robert opened his arms in a theatrical gesture. "What's the urgency? I cancelled an important meeting to be here." "Sit down, Robert." Henry indicated the chair in front of him, maintaining a neutral tone. "We need to talk about something serious." Robert settled into the leather armchair, an enigmatic smile on his lips. "You look terrible. Problems with physical therapy?" "Don't play dumb." Henry slid the flash drive across the table. "Do you know what's in here?" Robert's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Should I know?" 20 years of friendship, Robert. 20 years building something together. How could you? Silence weighed between them, broken only by the drumming of rain on the windows. Robert leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the small device. "What exactly are you talking about?" "The fraud, the embezzlement, the inflated contracts?" Henry took a deep breath. "It's all documented here, every cent diverted, every shady deal, every offshore account." Robert leaned back in his chair, his face a mask of tranquility. "And what do you intend to do with these supposed pieces of evidence?" "I want you to confess everything, return the money, and step away from the company." Henry maintained a steady gaze. "Out of respect for our old friendship, I'm giving you this chance." A dry laugh echoed through the room. "Old friendship? Is that how you see our partnership?" "Partnership?" Henry shook his head. "You turned our company into a money laundering scheme. You used my name, my reputation." "Your reputation," Robert cut in, his voice laden with sarcasm. "And what is your reputation compared to the billions we've made together? Or do you think your hands are completely clean?" "The difference is that I discovered the truth and want to fix things." Henry picked up the flash drive again. "You have 24 hours to think about it. After that, there's no going back." Robert slowly stood up, adjusting his jacket. His face had hardened and something dark gleamed in his eyes. "You really think you can threaten me like this? That you can simply corner me with some evidence on a flash drive?" "It's not a threat, Robert, it's a last chance." Henry held his gaze. "Meet me tomorrow night at the Brooklyn Bridge at 11 p.m. We can resolve this like civilized men." "As you wish." Robert headed for the door, pausing for a moment with his hand on the doorknob. "Just one thing, Henry. Have you ever stopped to think that some decisions have no turning back?" The door closed with a soft click, leaving Henry alone with his thoughts. The rain continued to fall outside harder now, as if sensing the storm that was to come. That same afternoon, while returning home, Henry stopped at a corner when he spotted a stray dog drenched by the rain. The animal was shivering, seeking shelter under an awning. Something in that dog's gaze touched his heart. He maneuvered his wheelchair to a nearby deli and bought a sandwich, then returned to offer it to the animal. The dog, which he would later discover was named Max, approached cautiously. His brown eyes revealed a mixture of fear and hope. Henry slowly extended his hand, letting the animal familiarize itself with his scent. "Hey, buddy," he murmured softly. "Are you hungry?" As he watched the dog devour the sandwich, Henry couldn't have imagined that this small act of kindness would completely change the course of his life. that this seemingly insignificant animal would become his salvation in the very near future. Night was approaching, and with it the hour of the decisive meeting. Henry tucked the flash drive into the inner pocket of his jacket, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. Tomorrow would be a decisive day, for better or for worse. What he didn't know yet was that fate had prepared a twist that no one could have predicted. The day dawned grey in New York City, as if the sky sensed the events that were about to unfold. Henry spent the following hours organizing documents, backing up evidence, and preparing for that night's meeting. Each passing minute seemed to drag on with torturous slowness. In the late afternoon, he decided to take a stroll through the park near his apartment, seeking to clear his mind. That's when he spotted the stray dog from the previous day again. The animal recognized him immediately, wagging its tail and approaching with cautious steps. "You're still around, friend?" Henry smiled, pulling a biscuit from his pocket. The dog accepted the offering delicately, its attentive eyes fixed on the man's face. There was something almost human in that gaze, an understanding that went beyond words. The hours dragged on until finally night fell. The rain, which had given a respite during the day, returned with full force. Henry maneuvered his wheelchair out of the adapted taxi, feeling the cold drops on his face. The Brooklyn Bridge loomed before him, its lights reflecting on the turbulent waters of the East River. Robert was already waiting for him at the agreed location, a solitary figure silhouetted against the night sky. His expensive suit was soaked, but he seemed not to care. As Henry approached, he noticed something different in his ex-friend's gaze, a calculated coldness he had never perceived before. "I thought you wouldn't come," Robert commented without turning around. "You know me, Robert, I always keep my word," Henry replied, stopping a few meters away. "Did you bring the confession documents?" A cruel smile formed on Robert's lips. "You know, Henry, I spent all day yesterday thinking about our conversation, about decisions that have no turning back." "And did you come to any conclusion?" "Yes," Robert finally turned, facing him. "I came to the conclusion that you've always been the weakest link in our partnership, always worried about ethics, about doing the right thing. That's for the weak, my friend." Henry felt a shiver run down his spine. Something was wrong, very wrong. "What do you mean by that?" "I mean that some people need to be removed from the path." Robert took a step in his direction. "For the greater good of the business, you understand." It was then that Henry realized the true danger he was in. He tried to turn his chair, but Robert was faster. In a sudden movement, he grabbed the handles of the wheelchair. "Robert, don't do this." Henry tried to break free, but it was too late. What neither of them noticed was that, hidden among the debris of a nearby construction site, a pair of attentive eyes was observing the entire scene. Max, the stray dog that Henry had fed, had followed his instinct there, guided by an inexplicable feeling that something bad was about to happen. The dog saw when Robert pushed the wheelchair forcefully against the safety railing. He saw when Henry desperately tried to grab onto something, anything. And he saw, with horror, when the body of the man who had treated him with kindness disappeared into the darkness of the churning waters. Without hesitating for a second, Max came out of his hiding place and ran towards the bridge. Robert, too busy checking if there were no witnesses, didn't notice the animal that passed like a bolt at his side. When he realized, Max had already plunged into the turbulent waters of the river. The impact with the cold water was brutal, but Max's instinct was stronger than any pain. Swimming against the current, his eyes frantically scanned the liquid darkness. That's when he noticed a movement a few meters ahead. Henry was still alive, struggling against the weight of the chair. That was pulling him down. With a strength that seemed to come from another world, Max dove. His teeth found the straps of the wheelchair, and with superhuman determination he began to pull. The current was strong, the darkness almost total, but something inside him refused to give up. Meanwhile, on the bridge, Robert observed the surface of the waters with a satisfied smile. In his mind, he was already elaborating the story he would tell. His partner, devastated by financial problems, had made a tragic decision. No one would question his version. After all, he was Robert Mitchell, one of the most respected businessmen in New York. What he didn't know was that at that exact moment in the depths of the East River, an unlikely hero was fighting to change the fate he had plotted. The night still held many surprises, and the story was far from over. The fight against the current seemed endless. Max swam with a strength that defied his own nature, his muscles burning with superhuman effort. His teeth still firmly held the straps of the wheelchair as he tried to keep Henry close to the surface. The businessman had already lost consciousness, his inert body being carried by the force of the waters. It was then that Max noticed a light ahead. It was the spotlights of a Coast Guard boat patrolling the river on that rainy night. The animal began to bark, even with its mouth still occupied holding Henry, producing muffled sounds that mixed with the noise of the storm. On the boat, Sergeant Smith adjusted the searchlight when he caught a strange movement in the waters. "Pete, turn! More to the left!" he shouted to his partner. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing a surreal scene. A dog struggling to keep a man afloat. "My God!" exclaimed Pete, already maneuvering the boat in their direction. "There's someone in the water!" The rescue operation was quick. With the help of ropes and buoys, the team managed to haul first Henry and then Max onto the boat. The businessman wasn't breathing, his cold and motionless body on the deck of the boat. "Start resuscitation procedures," ordered Smith, while his partner was already initiating chest compressions. Max watched everything closely, shivering from cold, but refusing to move away from Henry. His attentive eyes didn't leave the man's face for even a second. After what seemed like an eternity, Henry finally coughed, expelling water from his lungs. His eyes opened slowly, disoriented, first finding Max's wet snout, which had moved even closer at the first sign of life. "Easy, sir." Smith held his shoulder when Henry tried to get up. "You've been through a serious trauma. We're taking you straight to the hospital." Where am I?" muttered Henry, his voice hoarse and weak. "You were in the river. This dog here saved your life," explained Pete, patting Max's head. "I've never seen anything like it. He was keeping you on the surface when we found you." Henry looked at Max again, recognition shining in his eyes. "The stray from the street," he whispered before losing consciousness again. As the boat navigated quickly towards the nearest care point, no one noticed a dark figure observing everything from atop the bridge. Robert Mitchell had returned to make sure his plan had worked. Upon seeing the rescue, his face contorted into a mask of hatred and frustration. At the hospital, the medical team acted quickly. Henry was taken straight to the emergency room, while Max, even soaked and exhausted, refused to leave the entrance of the ER. A kind-hearted nurse brought a blanket and some food for the animal, moved by its dedication. The news of the unusual rescue didn't take long to spread. Soon, reporters began arriving at the hospital, eager for details of the story of the hero dog that had saved a man in the East River. But there was something that no one knew yet. In Henry's soaked jacket pocket, protected by a waterproof case, the flash drive with the evidence against Robert remained intact. In the emergency room, doctors worked to stabilize Henry. His body temperature was dangerously low, and there was concern about possible neurological damage due to the time he had spent submerged. Throughout the procedure, he mumbled disconnected words, as if reliving the moments of terror on the bridge. Outside the hospital, Robert was already articulating his version of the facts. With the help of his lawyer, he began to spread rumors that Henry was mentally unstable, suffering from depression due to business problems. The story of the alleged suicide began to take shape in the media, fueled by close sources who, in reality, were people bought by Robert. Detective Nolan, assigned to investigate the case, arrived at the hospital in the early hours of the morning. A veteran of the police force, something about that story didn't sound right to him. Why would a successful businessman try to take his own life? And why do it on the very night he had a scheduled meeting with his partner? Meanwhile, in the hospital reception, Max continued his silent vigil. His attentive eyes observed each person who entered and left, as if he were standing guard. The animal's instinct said that the danger had not yet passed, that the one who had hurt his new friend could return to finish what he had started. The early mornings slowly advanced, bringing with it the first lights of dawn. In his hospital bed, Henry began to recover, but his mind was still immersed in a confused fog of memories and nightmares. What no one knew was that in the next few hours, a series of events would begin to unfold. Events that would forever change the lives of all those involved in that story. The sun was already high when Mary, Henry's secretary, arrived at the hospital. Her eyes were red from crying, and in her hands trembled a brown envelope. Upon seeing Max in the reception, she knelt beside the animal, caressing its still damp fur. "So it was you who saved my boss," she whispered, her voice choked. "You're a true hero." Detective Nolan, who had returned to the hospital for more questioning, observed the scene with interest. He approached the secretary, noticing the envelope in her hands. "Miss Mary," he called softly, "can we talk for a moment?" Mary stood up, nervously adjusting her blazer. "Of course, Detective. Actually, I came precisely because I need to show you something." They headed to a more private area of the hospital, followed closely by Max, who seemed interested in the conversation. Mary opened the envelope and took out a series of documents. "Yesterday afternoon, before leaving the office, Mr. Henry gave me this," she explained, extending the papers to Nolan. "He said it was insurance, in case something happened to him." The detective examined the documents with growing attention. They were copies of some of the evidence that Henry had gathered against Robert. Not all, but enough to raise serious suspicions. "Why didn't he bring this to the police before?" questioned Nolan. Mary sighed. Mr. Henry still believed he could resolve everything peacefully. He and Mr. Robert had been friends for so long. At that moment, they were interrupted by a commotion in the hallway. Robert Mitchell had arrived at the hospital, accompanied by his lawyer and a small news crew. His face was the very image of feigned concern. "I came as soon as I heard," he declared for the cameras. "Henry is like a brother to me. I'm devastated by all this." Max started to growl softly, his fur bristling. Mary placed her hand on the animal's head, trying to calm him, but her own eyes revealed distrust. Detective Nolan discreetly put away the documents and approached the businessman. "Mr. Mitchell, what a coincidence. I really needed to talk to you." Robert forced a smile. "Of course, Detective, but first I need to see my friend. How is he?" "Mr. Henry still can't receive visitors," a nurse intervened. "Doctor's orders." "But I'm practically family," protested Robert, his mask of concern slipping for a moment. It was then that something unexpected happened. Max, who until then had only been growling, lunged towards Robert, barking furiously. The businessman recoiled in fright, almost tripping, over his own feet. "Get this mutt out of here," he demanded, his voice trembling slightly. Detective Nolan observed the scene with interest. In his years of experience, he had learned to trust animals' instincts. And this dog, who had risked its own life to save Henry, clearly had something against Robert. "Interesting," he muttered to himself. "Very interesting." In Henry's room, oblivious to all this commotion, the businessman was beginning to wake from a restless sleep. His first words were confused, broken. "Robert, the bridge. He tried." The nurse, checking his vital signs, signaled for him to calm down. "Everything's all right, Mr. Henry. You're safe now." But Henry knew he wasn't. Fragments of memory began to fit together in his mind. The argument on the bridge, Robert's cold look, the moment of the push, and something else. Something important. The flash drive. His hand instinctively searched for his jacket pocket, but he was wearing a hospital gown. In the corridor, the confusion continued. Robert, recovered from the initial shock, insisted on seeing Henry. Detective Nolan, in turn, didn't take his eyes off the businessman, observing every small gesture, every change of expression. Mary had sat on one of the benches in the corridor, her hands still trembling slightly. Max lay at her feet, but his eyes remained fixed in Robert's direction as if standing guard. What no one noticed was a discreet figure slinking through the hospital corridors, a nurse who didn't belong to that sector, but who seemed very interested in Henry's room. His hands moved nervously in the pockets of his uniform, and his eyes constantly checked a cell phone, as if waiting for instructions. The truth was beginning to emerge from the shadows, piece by piece, like a complex puzzle being assembled. But there was still much to be revealed, and time was running against all those involved in that story. The clock on the hospital wall marked 3 in the afternoon, when Henry had his first moment of real lucidity since the incident. His eyes opened with more clarity, and memories began to flow with greater sharpness. The nurse adjusting his IV noticed the change in his expression. "How are you feeling, Mr. Henry?" she asked, checking his vital signs. "My head." He brought his hand to his temple. "I need to talk to the police. Where are my clothes?" The nurse hesitated. "Your clothes were soaked, sir. They were stored with your belongings." At that moment, Detective Nolan entered the room accompanied by Mary. The secretary could barely contain her tears upon seeing her boss conscious. "Mr. Henry," she approached the bed. "I'm so glad you're better." Nolan made a discreet gesture for the nurse to leave them alone. As soon as she left, he closed the door and pulled up a chair. "Mr. Henry, I know you're still recovering, but we need to talk about what happened on the bridge." Henry closed his eyes for a moment, the images returning in painful flashes. "He tried to kill me," he whispered. "Robert, he planned it all." "Your secretary gave me some documents." Nolan took the papers out of the envelope. "But it seems there's more, something on a flash drive, perhaps." Henry's eyes widened. "How do you know about the flash drive?" "Mary mentioned that you had been worried about some important evidence, and we found an empty waterproof case in your jacket." "I need that flash drive." Henry tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness made him fall back. "All the evidence is there. Fraud, embezzlement, secret accounts." A familiar bark interrupted the conversation. Max, who had managed to escape the vigilance of the reception, came running into the room. The dog jumped up on its hind legs, resting its front paws on Henry's bed, its tail wagging frantically. "Hey, buddy," Henry smiled, petting the animal's head. "So it wasn't a dream, you really did save me." Nolan observed the scene with interest. "This dog has an impressive instinct. Earlier, when Robert Mitchell showed up, he almost lunged at the businessman." "Robert was here?" Henry's voice trembled slightly. "Yes, with a whole circus set up. Cameras, reporters, his lawyer. He's selling the story of the concerned friend very well." Mary, who had been silent until then, approached. "Mr. Henry, there's one more thing. One of the hospital security guards alerted me about a suspicious nurse lurking around your room. He's not part of the regular staff." Max pricked up his ears, as if understanding the conversation. His attentive eyes turned to the room's door. "Robert won't give up," Henry murmured. "He knows that if that evidence comes to light, it's all over for him." Nolan stood up, adjusting the holster under his jacket. "I'm going to reinforce the security of your room, and I'll assign a team to investigate this fake nurse." "Detective," Henry called before he left, "there's something you need to know. On the day of the incident, I had a meeting scheduled with Robert on the bridge. He knew I had the evidence. He knew it could destroy everything he had built. And you still went to meet him?" "I believed there was still a glimmer of the friend I knew. But when I got there, I saw in his eyes there was nothing left of the Robert I knew." Mary held her boss's hand. "You always wanted to see the best in people, but some people don't deserve that trust." Max, still by the bed, let out a low growl. Footsteps were approaching in the corridors. The door opened, revealing a figure dressed in white. "Excuse me," said the man, adjusting his nurse's badge. "Time for medication." The dog immediately positioned itself between the bed and the newcomer, the fur on its neck bristling. Mary narrowed her eyes, recognizing something familiar about the man. "Wait a moment," Nolan blocked the supposed nurse's path. "May I see your badge?" The man hesitated for a fraction of a second, time enough to confirm the detective's suspicions. Before anyone could react, he turned and ran down the corridor. "Police, stop!" Nolan drew his weapon and set off in pursuit, closely followed by Max. Mary quickly closed the room's door, staying by Henry's side. Her heart was racing, but her voice remained firm. "Don't worry, Mr. Henry. I won't let anyone near you." In the corridor, the chase continued. The fake nurse was running towards the emergency exit, knocking over equipment and scaring patients along the way. What he didn't count on was Max's speed and determination. The fake nurse was descending the emergency stairs, jumping several steps at a time, the echo of his footsteps mixing with Max's barks and Detective Nolan's shouts. The dog, more agile than the humans, was quickly closing the distance between them. On the third floor, the fugitive tried to throw off his pursuers by entering the orthopedics corridor, but Max wasn't fooled. With an impressive leap, the dog grabbed the hem of the man's uniform, causing him to lose his balance. "Don't move!" Nolan finally caught up, pointing his gun. "Hands where I can see them." The fake nurse, now immobilized on the floor, raised his trembling hands. A cell phone fell from his pocket and began to vibrate insistently. "Who are you?" demanded Nolan while handcuffing the suspect. "And who's trying to contact you?" I was just following orders," the man stammered. "He paid me to get something. From the room, that's all." Max was sniffing the fallen phone, growling softly. On the screen, an unknown number continued calling. "He who?" pressed Nolan, but the man just shook his head, clearly frightened. 2 hospital security guards came running, attracted by the commotion. Nolan handed the suspect over to their custody and collected the phone as evidence. Max, still alert, kept his eyes fixed on the prisoner. Back in Henry's room, Mary was trying to calm her boss, who was visibly agitated by the whole situation. "We need to find that flash drive," he insisted. "Robert must be desperate to get it." "But where could it be?" Mary frowned. "Your clothes were taken to—" She stopped mid-sentence, her eyes widening. "The hospital laundry. That's where they take all the patients' clothes." At that moment, Nolan returned to the room with Max, who immediately went to check on Henry. "We caught the imposter," the detective informed. "He hasn't confessed who hired him yet, but I think we all know." "Detective," Mary stepped forward. "Mr. Henry's clothes were taken to the laundry. The flash drive might be there." Nolan wasted. "No time. I'm going down there right now. Mary, stay here with Mr. Henry. Max—" Before he could complete the sentence, the dog was already by his side, ready for another mission. The hospital laundry was in the basement, a maze of poorly lit corridors and industrial machines. The strong smell of cleaning products made Max sneeze several times as they followed an employee. "The emergency patient's clothes are in this area," she indicated a pile of plastic bags. "But it's been hours since they were brought in. They may have been processed." Nolan began examining the bags, looking for any identification. Max, in turn, was sniffing the air intensely, as if searching for something specific. Suddenly, the dog darted between the machines, barking excitedly. Nolan followed him to a more secluded corner, where a pile of damp clothes awaited processing. "Good boy," exclaimed the detective upon finding Henry's jacket. The fabric was still wet from the river, but the waterproof case was intact in its inner pocket, and inside it, the flash drive. Nolan carefully held the small device. "Come on, Max, we need to get this to safety." On the way back to the room, the detective couldn't help but smile as he saw the dog trotting proudly by his side. In less than 24 hours, that stray had become more efficient than many of his investigators. Meanwhile, in his office on the top floor of one of New York's most luxurious buildings, Robert Mitchell received a call that made his face turn pale. "What do you mean they caught him? And the flash drive?" His voice trembled with anger. "You incompetent fool, I'm not paying a fortune for you to fail." On the other end of the line, a voice tried to explain, but Robert wasn't listening anymore. His empire was beginning to crumble, and he knew he needed to act fast, very fast. On his cell phone, a message blinked insistently. "Boss, the dog? It's not an ordinary stray. It's helping the police. They found something in the laundry." Robert threw the phone on the desk with force. How had a simple street dog become his biggest problem? He needed to think of something, and quickly. His gaze wandered over the city stretching beyond the panoramic windows. Down there, somewhere, a small dog was about to destroy everything he had built over the years. The recovered flash drive was now in the hands of the police technology department. Detective Nolan watched attentively as the forensic expert Charlie analyzed its contents. "There are thousands of files," commented Charlie, his eyes fixed on the computer screen. "Contracts, bank transfers, offshore documents. There's enough material here to bring down an empire." Nolan nodded, thoughtful. "How long do you need to organize all this in a presentable form for a judge?" "A few hours. Mr. Henry was very methodical in organizing the evidence. Each file is catalogued and referenced." At the hospital, Mary had managed to get an improvised bed for Max next to Henry's bedside. The dog refused to leave the room, keeping constant guard. His presence brought an inexplicable comfort to the businessman, who was still recovering from the trauma. You know, Max, Henry spoke softly, stroking the animal's head. Before all this, I never gave much importance to small acts of kindness. It took almost losing everything to understand what really matters. Max raised his head, his attentive eyes fixed on Henry, as if understanding every word. That day, when I gave you food on the street, it was such a simple gesture. Who could have imagined that you would repay it by saving my life? The moment was interrupted by a knock on the door. It was Dr. Sanders, the doctor in charge of the case. "Mr. Henry, I have good news," he announced, consulting his clipboard. "Your tests are excellent. If this continues, you can be discharged tomorrow." "That's great, Doctor," Mary smiled, "but we're still worried about security." "As for that," a familiar voice sounded from the door, "you can rest easy." Detective Nolan entered the room accompanied by 2 police officers. His countenance was lighter, almost satisfied. "The evidence on the flash drive is irrefutable," he continued. "At this moment, a team is on its way to Robert Mitchell's office with a search and seizure warrant." Henry let out a deep sigh. Finally. In Robert's luxurious office, chaos was setting in. Employees were running from one side to the other, shredding documents and deleting files from computers. The businessman, locked in his room, was frantically talking on the phone. "You need to get me out of the country now," he demanded. "I don't care about the cost. In 2 hours I want a plane ready on the runway." But it was too late. Police cars were already surrounding the building, and special agents were coming up in the elevators. Robert, hearing the commotion in the hallway, felt cold sweat run down his forehead. Back at the hospital, Mary was receiving an important call. "Mr. Henry," she turned to her boss, "the press has discovered everything. It's crazy out there. Everyone wants to know about the corrupt businessman who tried to take the life of his ex-partner." "And about the hero dog," added Nolan. "It looks like Max is going to become a celebrity." As if understanding, Max wagged his tail, eliciting laughter in the room. "He deserves all the recognition," said Henry, his voice choked with emotion. "He not only saved my life, but helped bring justice." Nolan's cell phone vibrated. After a few moments of conversation, his face lit up. "They just arrested Robert," he announced. "He tried to escape through the back of the building, but couldn't. It's all over." An emotionally charged silence took over the room. It was the end of a nightmare, the closure of a dark cycle. Henry looked out the window, observing the sun that was beginning to set on the New York horizon. "It's not all over, Detective," he finally said. "It's just beginning. We have a lot of work ahead to fix the damage Robert caused to the company, to the employees, to the affected families." Mary approached, placing her hand on her boss's shoulder. "And we'll do it together, Mr. Henry, one step at a time." Max got up and rested his head on Henry's lap, as if offering his unconditional support. The businessman smiled, feeling a peace he hadn't experienced in a long time. Outside the hospital, the sun was tinting the sky in orange hues, announcing the end of another day. But for that group of people, and especially for a small stray dog that had become a hero, it was just the beginning of a new journey. The next morning, the news of Robert Mitchell's arrest was splashed across the country's main headlines. The newspapers detailed the corruption scheme, the attempts to conceal evidence, and especially the impressive story of the dog that had saved Henry's life. In the hospital room, Mary was organizing the last details for her boss's discharge. Max watched attentively every movement, as if supervising the preparations. "The adapted car is already waiting downstairs," she informed, "but there's a small problem. There are dozens of reporters at the hospital entrance." Henry, already seated in his new wheelchair, smiled. "It's not a problem, Mary. It's time to tell our story. People need to know the truth." Detective Nolan entered the room carrying a package under his arm. "I brought a gift for our hero," he said, unwrapping a new collar and an identification tag with the name Max engraved. The dog approached, curious, allowing Nolan to put on the collar. His eyes shone with a mixture of pride and gratitude. "Now it's official," declared the detective. "Max is an honorary member of the New York Police Department. And he's also officially part of my family," added Henry, his voice choked with emotion. "If he accepts, of course." In response, Max rested his head on Henry's knee, wagging his tail energetically. When the hospital doors opened, a wave of flashes and microphones rose. Reporters jostled, all wanting to record the moment. Henry, in his wheelchair, had Max faithfully by his side, while Mary and Detective Nolan accompanied them. "Mr. Henry, how do you feel knowing that Robert Mitchell is in jail? Is it true that the dog was crucial in recovering the evidence? What do you plan to do now?" Henry raised his hand, asking for silence. His voice, when he spoke, was laden with serenity. "What happened in the last few days has completely changed my perspective on life. I learned that sometimes loyalty and kindness can come from the most unexpected places." He petted Max. "This dog not only saved my life, but taught me a valuable lesson about true trust and friendship." The photographers vied for the best angle to capture the scene. The businessman in the wheelchair and the stray dog that had become a hero. It was an image that perfectly symbolized the turnaround that story had taken. "And what about the business?" asked a reporter. "The company will undergo a complete restructuring," Henry replied. "Every cent diverted will be returned. Every irregularity will be corrected. We have a responsibility to our employees and to society." On the way home, Henry observed the city through the car window. New York seemed different now, more alive, more full of possibilities. Max was lying on the seat beside him, his presence a comforting anchor. "Mary," Henry called, "schedule a meeting with the board for tomorrow. We have a lot of work ahead." "It's already scheduled, Mr. Henry," she replied with a smile. "And I've also scheduled a visit to a pet shop. Our new security director needs some basic items." Max pricked up his ears at hearing the words pet shop, eliciting laughter in the car. In his new adapted house, Henry was greeted by a team of nurses and physical therapists. The recovery process would be long, but now he had extra motivation. Each small victory would be shared with his new companion. That night, as the city prepared to sleep, Henry was on his balcony, observing the lights of New York. Max rested by his side, his calm breathing a constant reminder that miracles can happen in the most unexpected moments. "You know, Max," Henry murmured, "when I gave you that sandwich on the street, I thought I was just helping a hungry dog. I didn't imagine that I was, in fact, meeting the most loyal friend I've ever had." The dog raised its head, its eyes meeting Henry's with that deep understanding that only animals seem to have. On the horizon, the first stars were beginning to appear. It was the beginning of a new chapter, not just for Henry and Max, but for all who had been touched by that extraordinary story of courage, loyalty, and redemption. A week had passed since Robert Mitchell's arrest. In the company's main meeting room, Henry adjusted his wheelchair at the head of the table, while Mary distributed folders with documents to the board members. Max, now wearing an elegant blue vest with the company logo, was lying next to his owner, attentively observing every movement. "Ladies and gentlemen," Henry began, his voice firm, echoing through the room, "today we're not here just to discuss numbers and strategies. We're here to redefine who we are as a company." The screens on the walls displayed graphs and spreadsheets detailing the impact of Robert's actions in recent years. Several board members shook their heads, still processing the magnitude of recent events. "Our first action will be to create a compensation fund," Henry continued. "Every employee who was harmed during the previous management will be properly reimbursed. Additionally, we'll implement a new benefits program and profit-sharing plan." "But that will cost a fortune," protested one of the older directors. Max raised his head, letting out a low growl. The director immediately fell silent, remembering that this was not an ordinary dog, but the hero who had exposed all the corruption. "Cost a fortune?" Henry smiled. "And how much is the dignity of our employees worth? What's the value of the trust they placed in us? No, gentlemen, the real cost was what we paid all these years living in lies." Mary projected a new slide on the screen. It was the project for a rehabilitation center that would be built on the land adjacent to the company. "This will be our next big investment," Henry explained, "a space dedicated to people with disabilities, offering free treatment and programs for inclusion in the job market." The room fell silent for a few moments until one of the younger board members spoke up. "Mr. Henry, this is revolutionary, but how will we ensure transparency after everything that's happened?" Excellent question, he smiled, petting Max. That's why we've created an independent ethics committee, and our friend here will be the official mascot of the transparency program. The dog wagged its tail, as if understanding its new responsibility. After the meeting, Henry and Max went to Robert's old office, which was being transformed into a collaborative space for social projects. Employees passing by made a point of greeting the two, many bringing special treats for Max. "Look at that," Mary commented, observing the scene. "Who would have thought that a stray dog would become the symbol of a new era in the company?" Henry watched the workers removing the old plaque with Robert's name from the door. In its place, a transparent glass panel would be installed, e.e. metaphor for the new management policy. "You know, Mary," he replied, "sometimes we need to lose everything to understand what really matters. Max didn't just save me from that night on the bridge, he saved me from who I was becoming." At the end of the day, as they were returning home, they passed by the place where it all began, the corner where Henry had first met Max. The dog immediately recognized the place, turning to look out the car window. "Want to stop for a bit?" Henry asked the driver. The car parked and Mary helped her boss with the wheelchair. Max guided them to the exact awning where he had taken shelter from the rain on that fateful day. "This is where our story began, friend," Henry spoke softly, with a simple act of kindness. As if wanting to mark the moment, Max approached another stray dog nearby. To everyone's surprise, he shared the treats he had received at the company with his new friend. "Amazing," whispered Mary, moved. "He's passing on the kindness he received." Henry felt his eyes water. That simple gesture from the dog carried a profound lesson about generosity and compassion. In a world where so many were corrupted by power, here was a pure example of how small acts of kindness could generate an endless chain of good. Night was beginning to fall over New York, and the first stars were appearing in the sky. On the way back home, Henry made a mental note. They needed to include a support project for stray animals in the company's new program. After all, if an abandoned dog could change so many lives, imagine what else would be possible to achieve. 3 months had passed since the transformation in the company. The rehabilitation center was almost ready, its glass walls reflecting the morning sun as workers put the finishing touches. Henry observed the progress of the construction from his new office, now adapted to better accommodate his wheelchair. Max was in his usual place, a special bed near the businessman's desk. But today there was something different about his posture. The dog seemed more agitated than normal, constantly looking at the door. "What is it, buddy?" Henry asked, curious about the animal's behavior. In response, the door opened, and Mary entered, accompanied by a young reporter from the country's largest business magazine. "Mr. Henry," Mary began, "this is Laura Mendez. She's doing the cover story on the company's transformation." Max immediately got up to greet the visitors, his tail wagging in approval. The reporter couldn't contain a smile as she was greeted so warmly by the famous hero dog. "It's an honor to meet you both in person," said Laura, settling into the chair indicated by Mary. "Your story has inspired a lot of people. Did you know that after what happened, adoptions of stray animals increased by 300% in the city?" Henry's eyes widened in surprise. "Really?" "Yes," Laura consulted her notes. "People started seeing stray dogs differently. If a mutt can be a hero, anyone can be a hero," Henry completed, petting Max. "It's just a matter of opportunity." The interview flowed naturally, with Laura asking questions about the changes implemented in the company. Henry explained about the compensation fund, which had already benefited more than 1,000 employees, and about the new social projects. But the most significant change, he emphasized, was in the company culture. "We are no longer a corporation, focused solely on profits. We are a community committed to everyone's well-being." Mary, who was following the conversation, added, "The Stray Animal Support Program has already rescued more than 200 dogs. They all receive veterinary treatment and are put up for adoption." "And what about the rehabilitation center?" asked Laura, pointing to the construction through the window. "It will be inaugurated next month," Henry replied, his eyes shining with pride. "We'll offer free treatment for people with disabilities and a complete professional inclusion program. We want to show that physical limitations don't define anyone's potential." Max, who had remained quiet during the interview, suddenly got up and went to the door. Seconds later, Detective Nolan entered the room. "Impressive," Laura commented. "Does he always know when someone is coming?" "Max has a sixth sense for people," Nolan smiled. "Sorry to interrupt, but I brought news about the case." The detective explained that Robert had reached a plea deal with the justice system, revealing other corruption schemes that involved powerful businessmen. "The interesting thing," Nolan continued, "is that he asked to make a public statement. He said it took losing everything to understand the mistake he had made." Henry shook his head, thoughtful. "Sometimes redemption comes after great losses." Laura was furiously taking notes in her notebook. "This story keeps getting more incredible. A business drama that turned into a lesson about humanity, compassion, and second chances." At that moment, a group of children passed through the corridor accompanied by their parents. They were participants in the new pediatric physiotherapy program that the company had implemented. Upon seeing Max through the office's glass walls, they began to wave excitedly. The dog looked at Henry as if asking for permission. "You can go, buddy," the businessman smiled. "I know you love the pet therapy sessions." Max trotted happily out of the room, soon surrounded by smiling children who hugged him and petted him. "Look at that," Mary commented, moved. From stray dog to therapist, who could have imagined? Laura observed the scene, enchanted. "Mr. Henry, what's the biggest lesson you've taken from this whole experience?" Henry was silent for a moment, watching Max interact with the children. The dog took special care with those who used wheelchairs, as if he perfectly understood their condition. "The biggest lesson," he finally replied, "it's that true transformation begins with small acts of kindness. I gave a simple sandwich to her stray dog, and that gesture triggered a series of events that changed not just my life, but that of hundreds of people. Never underestimate the power of a good deed, no matter how small it may seem." The day of the rehabilitation center's inauguration finally arrived. A crowd gathered in front of the modern building, whose glass facade reflected the blue New York sky. Colorful banners decorated the entrance, and dozens of people in wheelchairs eagerly awaited the moment of the ribbon cutting. Henry, impeccable, in his navy blue suit, positioned his wheelchair near the podium. Max, wearing a special bow tie for the occasion, faithfully remained by his side. Mary was giving the final touches to the organization, making sure everything was perfect. "Are you nervous?" she asked, adjusting the microphone for her boss. "A little," Henry admitted, smiling. "But it's a good nervousness, the kind you get when you know you're doing the right thing." Among the special guests was Detective Nolan, who was animatedly chatting with some of the first patients to be treated at the center. Laura, the reporter who had done the story about the company's transformation, was also present, her photographer capturing every moment. When the time came for the speech, an expectant silence fell over the environment. Henry took a deep breath and began. "6 months ago, I was at a very different point in my life, concerned only with numbers, profits, and power. It took going through a transformative experience to understand that true success is not measured by bank balance, but by the positive impact we have on people's lives." Max leaned his head on Henry's knee, as if offering support. The businessman smiled and continued. "This rehabilitation center is born not just as a physical structure, but as a symbol of hope and transformation. Here, people with disabilities will find not only quality treatment, but also real opportunities for inclusion in the job market." Mary noticed that several of those present were discreetly wiping away tears. The emotion was palpable in the air. "And do you know who taught me the greatest lesson about overcoming?" Henry paused, looking at Max. "A stray dog, someone society usually ignores, but who proved to have more courage and loyalty than many humans. That's why, in addition to serving people, this center will also house a pet therapy program coordinated by our hero here." Max, as if understanding they were talking about him, sat up straighter, drawing smiles from the audience. "Starting today," Henry continued, 50 people will begin their treatments here. In 6 months, we'll be able to serve 300. patients simultaneously, and most importantly, everything free, accessible to those who really need it. The speech was interrupted by spontaneous applause. A little girl in a wheelchair approached, handing Henry a drawing. It was a colorful illustration of him and Max, with hearts around them. "This center is for you." Henry raised the drawing, emotional. "For all who, like me, have learned that physical limitations don't define who we are or what we're capable of." After cutting the ribbon, guests were able to tour the facilities. The center had therapeutic pools, physiotherapy rooms equipped with cutting-edge technology, spaces for occupational therapy, and even a sensory garden. In a special area, several children were already gathering around Max, who would participate in pet therapy sessions. The dog had a natural gift for calming young patients, especially those more frightened by the treatments. "Look at that," Mary commented to Henry, observing the scene. "Who would have thought that that scared and wet dog from the street would turn into a natural-born therapist?" "Max always knew his purpose," Henry replied. "I was the one who took a while to understand mine." Laura approached, her notepad in hand. "Mr. Henry, have you thought about expanding this project to other cities?" "Actually," he smiled, "we're already in negotiations with 3 city halls. The idea is to create a network of centers like this across the country, and each unit will have its own pet therapy program, rescuing stray dogs and training them to help in patient treatment." On the other side of the hall, Detective Nolan was talking with a group of businessmen who showed interest in supporting the initiative. Henry and Max's story had touched many hearts, sparking a real wave of awareness about social responsibility. At the end of the day, when most of the guests had already left, Henry remained in the center's garden with Max. The sun was setting on the horizon, painting the sky in orange hues. "You know, buddy," he spoke softly, "sometimes I wonder who saved whom that night on the bridge. You may have pulled me out of the water, but it went far beyond that. You saved me from myself, showed me a greater purpose." Max rested his head on Henry's lap, his expressive eyes fixed on his friend's face. The bond between them went far beyond the relationship between man and animal. It was a connection of souls that fate had intertwined in an extraordinary way. A gentle spring breeze blew through the gardens of the rehabilitation center, now in full operation for 3 months. The newly planted trees were beginning to bloom, filling the air with a sweet and renewing scent. In the inner courtyard, a group of children was participating in a special pet therapy session with Max. "Very good, Johnny," encouraged the physiotherapist, as a 7-year-old boy, supported by his crutches, walked determinedly to throw a ball for Max to fetch. "Look how much steadier you are today." The dog, always attentive, gently picked up the ball and returned it directly to the boy's hands, eliciting laughs of joy. Henry observed the scene from his office on the 2nd floor, his heart overflowing with happiness. "Mr. Henry," Mary entered with a folder of documents, "the first quarter reports for the center have arrived." "And how are we doing?" "We've exceeded all goals," she smiled, spreading the papers on the desk. "The professional inclusion program has already employed 35 people with disabilities in partner companies. The waiting list for treatments continues to grow, but we've managed to speed up the care with the hiring of new professionals." Henry was leafing through the reports with satisfaction when his phone rang. It was Detective Nolan. "Henry, do you have a minute? I need to tell you something interesting." "Of course, Detective. What happened?" "Remember Robert? He's doing amazing work in prison. He implemented a rehabilitation program for inmates through caring for abandoned animals. They have already recovered more than 50 dogs." Henry was silent for a moment, processing the information. "Who would have thought?" "Yeah," Nolan continued. "He said he was inspired by his story with you and Max. It seems some people really can change." After hanging up the phone, Henry remained thoughtful. Mary, who had overheard the conversation, commented, "It's incredible how one story can generate so many positive outcomes, isn't it?" "It's like a stone thrown into a lake," Henry replied. "The waves expand far beyond the initial point." At that moment, Max entered the room still wearing his therapist vest. He had just finished another successful session with the children. He lay down in his special bed, but kept his eyes attentively on his owner. "You know, Mary," Henry continued, Sometimes I find myself thinking about how everything has changed. The company has never been better, even with all the social investments. It's as if the universe conspires in our favor when we do the right thing. And it's not just the company, she added. You're different, lighter, happier. A knock on the door interrupted the conversation. It was Laura, the reporter, accompanied by her photographer. Sorry for the unannounced visit, she smiled. But I couldn't miss this. Have you seen the magazine cover yet? Laura held out an still-sealed copy of the country's largest business magazine. On the cover was an impressive photo of Henry in his wheelchair with Max by his side and the rehabilitation center in the background. The headline read, "The Empathy Revolution: How a Businessman and a Stray Dog Are Transforming Lives." The article is having an incredible repercussion, Laura continued. Business people from all over the country are getting in touch, wanting to know how they can implement similar programs. Henry leafed through the magazine, moved to see the photos of children in treatment, smiling employees, the therapeutic garden. It was the materialization of a dream he didn't even know he had until a few months ago. And there's one more surprise. Laura took another envelope from her bag. Your story has been nominated for the International Social Impact Award. The ceremony will be next month in New York. Max, who until then had been resting quietly, approached as he sensed the emotion in the air. Henry petted his head, his eyes moist. I don't know if I deserve so much recognition, he said humbly. The real hero is here by my side. You're both heroes, Mary corrected. Each in your own way, you've inspired a chain of kindness that continues to spread. Through the window, they could see another group of children arriving for treatment. Their faces lit up as they spotted the building, knowing that there they would find not only medical care, but also love, understanding, and hope. That's what matters, Henry concluded, observing the scene. Not the awards or recognition, but knowing that each day more people are having the chance to transform their lives. Max barked softly, as if agreeing. His wise gaze seemed to say that this story, which had begun with a simple act of kindness on a rainy night, was far from over. It was just the beginning of something much bigger, a wave of transformation that would continue to touch hearts and change lives for a long time to come. New York sparkled under the autumn sun. From the top of his hotel room, Henry observed Central Park, its trees painted in shades of red and gold. Max was by his side, fascinated by the different sounds and smells of the city. I still can't believe we're here, Mary commented, adjusting the special bow tie that Max would wear at the International Social Impact Award ceremony. The event was to be held at the iconic Lincoln Center, bringing together personalities and business people from around the world committed to social transformation projects. Henry and Max's story had captured the attention of the organizing committee, not only for its uniqueness, but mainly for the tangible results they had achieved. Mr. Henry, Mary called, checking her tablet. The video conference with the center is scheduled for 10 minutes from now. On the computer screen appeared the image of the inner courtyard of the rehabilitation center in New York. Dozens of children and their families crowded together, eager to participate in this special moment. Good afternoon, everyone, Henry smiled, moved to see so many familiar faces. Max, hearing the children's voices, approached the screen, wagging his tail. Max! Max! The little ones shouted, causing the dog to tilt his head, curious about the technology that allowed him to see his friends even while being so far away. We brought a surprise, announced the chief physiotherapist. The camera moved, revealing 3 new dogs wearing therapy vests similar to Max's. These are the first graduates of our therapy dog training program, all rescued from the streets, just like our pioneer. Henry felt his eyes water. The project that had started with a single dog was now multiplying, creating new possibilities for transformation. And there's more, the professional continued. 2 other cities have already confirmed the construction of centers similar to ours. The model is expanding. The video conference continued with the children recounting their progress in treatments. Johnny, the boy with crutches, could now take several steps without support. A little girl who could barely speak when she arrived at the center now wouldn't stop chattering, telling how the dogs had helped her overcome her fear of expressing herself. After the call, Henry remained silent, absorbing everything he had heard. Mary, noticing his emotion, placed her hand on his shoulder. "You've created something extraordinary," she said softly. "No, Mary," he corrected. "Max created it. I just followed his example." A knock on the door announced Laura's arrival, who would cover the award ceremony. The reporter was radiant. "You won't believe it," she exclaimed. "I just found out that several international business people want to implement the center's model in their countries. Your story is literally going around the world." Max, who had been quiet until then, approached Henry, resting his head on his lap. It was a gesture he always made when he felt his friend needed emotional support. "You know what's most incredible?" Henry reflected, stroking the dog's head. "All of this started with a moment of vulnerability. I was at rock bottom, betrayed, almost lost my life. And it was precisely at that moment that I found my true mission." Laura was furiously taking notes in her notebook. "And what is that mission, Mr. Henry?" "To show that everyone deserves a second chance, whether it's a businessman who lost his way like Robert, or a stray dog that just needed an opportunity to show its worth." Through the hotel window, the sun was beginning to set, painting the New York sky with vibrant colors. In a few hours, Henry and Max would be on the stage of Lincoln Center, sharing their story with the world. "Mary," Henry called, "did you bring that piece of the first blanket I gave to Max?" "Of course," she smiled, taking a small piece of fabric from her bag. "I never leave without it." Henry held the worn piece of cloth, remembering that rainy night in New York. Who could have imagined that a simple act of kindness would turn into something so grand? "This piece of fabric," he showed Laura, "is our lucky charm. It represents the moment when two broken lives met and, together, discovered how to become whole again." Max sniffed the fabric, his eyes shining with recognition. Even after so much time, that small piece of blanket still carried the memory of their first moment of connection. Night was falling over New York, and with it came the promise of a new chapter in that extraordinary story. A story that proved that the true power of transformation lies not in money or status, but in the small gestures of love and compassion we choose to share with the world. The Lincoln Center was packed. In the audience, people from different countries and cultures gathered to celebrate projects that were changing the world. Henry waited backstage, his wheelchair positioned near the stage entrance. Max, impeccable in his gala attire, remained serene by his side. "5 minutes," Mary warned, checking the ceremony program one last time. Laura, who had managed to gain backstage access, approached with breaking news. "Mr. Henry, I just received some incredible information. The prison where Robert is has officially implemented the rehabilitation program with abandoned dogs. There are already requests from other prison units wanting to replicate the project." Henry smiled, moved. It was as if the circle was beginning to close, with each person touched by his story finding their own way to multiply the good. On stage, the presenter began to introduce the story. "Sometimes the greatest miracles happen in the most unlikely moments. Our next story begins on a rainy night in New York, when a businessman in a wheelchair decided to share his lunch with a stray dog." Max pricked up his ears upon hearing the narration, as if recognizing his own story. Henry held the small piece of blanket in his pocket, the same one he had used to dry Max's wet fur during their first encounter. When they entered the stage, the audience erupted in applause. On the giant screens, images of the rehabilitation center alternated with photos of children in treatment and the new therapy dogs in training. "Good evening," Henry began, his voice firm at the microphone. "I'm here today not to talk about numbers or statistics. Although our results are impressive, I'm here to talk about second chances." Max sat next to the wheelchair, his elegant and attentive posture causing smiles in the audience. "This dog not only saved my life in a moment of despair, he taught me that our true strength lies not in the power we accumulate, but in the ability to touch and transform other lives." The theater lights softened, and new images appeared on the screens. Before and after of children who had gone through the center, smiling employees, families gathered in the therapeutic garden. Our rehabilitation center is not just a place for medical treatment. It's a space where people rediscover their value, where limitations turn into possibilities, where abandoned dogs become agents of healing. Mary, in the wings, discreetly wiped away a tear. Beside her, Laura wrote frantically in her notebook, capturing every moment. But the most extraordinary thing, Henry continued, is how a single act of kindness can trigger a chain reaction of transformation. Today, our story has inspired similar programs in prisons, schools, and companies. People who have never met are connected by an invisible thread of compassion and hope. Max, sensing the emotion of the moment, rested his head on Henry's knee. It was a simple gesture, but loaded with meaning. The same pure and true connection that had united them from the first moment. This award, Henry raised the trophy he had just received, doesn't belong just to us. It belongs to every child who has overcome their limits, to every professional who dedicates their time to others, to every rescued dog that has found its purpose as a therapist. The audience was in absolute silence, hypnotized by the sincerity and emotion of those words. And above all, his voice choked slightly, it belongs to all who still believe that small acts of kindness can change the world. At the end of the speech, the ovation was deafening. People stood up, applauding with tears in their eyes. Max, perceiving the commotion, wagged his tail, eliciting even more smiles. Backstage, after the ceremony, business people and representatives of social organizations crowded around, all wanting to know more about the project. Mary organized a list of contacts, while Laura continued her exclusive coverage. "Mr. Henry," called an elegant lady with a French accent, "we would like to implement your model in Paris. Can we start discussions?" "Of course," he smiled. "Our goal has always been for this idea to spread around the world." Max received pats from all sides, maintaining his characteristic serenity. It was as if he knew that his mission went far beyond being a therapy dog. He had become a symbol of hope and transformation. Later, back at the hotel, Henry observed the lights of New York through the window. Max rested by his side, exhausted but satisfied after such a special day. "You know, friend," Henry murmured, "sometimes I wonder if you have any idea how much you've changed the world." In response, Max raised his head and looked deeply into his companion's eyes, with that unique wisdom that only dogs seem to possess. At that moment, both knew that their journey was just beginning. There was still much good to be done, many lives to be touched, many stories of transformation to inspire.